The Costa Concordia disaster, January 13, 2012. Off the coast of Giglio Island, Italy, one of the world's most luxurious cruise liners, the Costa Concordia, set sail on what was supposed to be a week of Mediterranean paradise. The $570 million floating city, carrying more than 4,200 passengers and crew, departed Civitavecchia, Italy, for a week-long Mediterranean cruise. At 114,500 tons, it was one of the largest cruise ships ever built, a monument to modern luxury. Just 2 hours into the voyage, Captain Francesco Schettino made a fatal choice. Ignoring the planned course, he steered the ship dangerously close to Giglio Island to perform a salute, a show-off maneuver meant to impress people on land. At 9:45 p.m., the ship struck a submerged reef, tearing a 160-foot gash through the hull. Seawater flooded the lower decks, short-circuiting the electrical systems and leaving the vessel powerless. Passengers felt a violent shudder. Then silence. Within minutes, the lights went out. As the ship began to list sharply, panic spread. Hallways turned into rivers. Families crawled along tilting floors, clutching children as the crew shouted conflicting instructions. Lifeboats on one side couldn't even be lowered because the ship was leaning too far. While hundreds remained trapped below, Captain Schettino abandoned the bridge, leaving his officers and passengers behind. By dawn, the Costa Concordia lay on its side, half submerged. 32 people were dead, hundreds more injured. Survivors described climbing over the hull in darkness, guided only by rescue spotlights. The wreck was finally removed in 2014 after the largest maritime salvage operation in history. In 2015, Schettino was convicted of manslaughter, causing a shipwreck, abandoning passengers, and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. The media called him Captain Coward. He later applied for partial release, sparking outrage from survivors and victims' families. The MS Estonia disaster. September 28, 1994. In the icy Baltic Sea, the passenger ferry MS Estonia sailed overnight from Tallinn, Estonia to Stockholm, Sweden, with 989 people on board. It was a routine crossing until the weather turned. By midnight, the ship was battling 12-foot waves and gusting winds. But just before 1 a.m., something began to go wrong. Passengers heard a deep metallic bang beneath their feet, then another, louder. Within minutes, the ship's massive bow visor, the door that allowed vehicles to drive onto the car deck, had torn loose under heavy waves. When it broke away completely, freezing seawater rushed into the open car deck, flooding it instantly. The ship rolled to its side in seconds. Alarms blared. Dishes crashed. Hundreds were thrown from their bunks as corridors tilted to impossible angles. In the control room, the captain gave a single Mayday call. Mayday, Mayday, Estonia, we have a bad list to starboard. In simple terms, a list means the ship is tilting to one side and staying there. Starboard means the right side. The MS Estonia was leaning so far over that lifeboats couldn't be launched. It was the last transmission ever heard from the ship. Within 30 minutes, the MS Estonia had vanished beneath the surface. Helicopters and rescue boats arrived to find only floating debris and people clinging to life rafts in sub-zero temperatures. Most wore no life jackets. The water temperature was just 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill within 30 minutes. Of the 989 people aboard, only 137 survived. The rest, 852 men, women, and children, drowned in one of the fastest maritime sinkings ever recorded. The official inquiry later found that design flaws and rough seas had caused the bow visor's failure. In the years since, survivors have described the sound of steel twisting, the screams from sealed cabins, and the silence that followed. 852 lives lost in 30 minutes. It was one of the fastest sinkings in modern history. But it wasn't the deadliest. Not even close. The MV Doña Paz disaster. December 20th, 1987. The Philippine ferry MV Doña Paz was making an overnight voyage from Tacloban City to Manila, carrying far more people than it was designed to hold. Official records listed about 1,500 passengers, but survivors said there were over 4,000 on board, packed shoulder to shoulder, sleeping in stairwells, aisles, and open decks. It was nearly 11 p.m. when the sea suddenly erupted in light. A fully loaded oil tanker named MT Vector was sailing the same route, carrying 8,800 barrels of gasoline and kerosene. Somewhere in the dark waters of Tablas Strait, the two vessels were on a collision course. When they finally struck, the impact tore Vector's tanks open. A sheet of flaming fuel spilled across the water, instantly igniting both ships. Passengers awoke to an explosion that shook the decks apart. Flames raced through the ferry faster than anyone could run. Within minutes, the entire surface of the sea was on fire. People jumped overboard, only to land in burning water. The heat was so intense that nearby rescue ships couldn't get close. Some witnesses said the blaze lit up the horizon like a sunrise. There were almost no distress signals, no life vests, and no working radios. The Doña Paz burned for hours before finally sinking into the strait, leaving thousands unaccounted for. Out of every person aboard, only 24 survived. Investigators later found that the tanker was undermanned and improperly crewed. No lookout, and its safety equipment was inoperable. The Doña Paz had no radio officer on duty. The result was the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in history, 4,386 lives lost. One survivor, Paquito Osabel, said he swam through burning oil for 2 hours, watching others around him disappear beneath flaming waves. In the Philippines, it's remembered as Asia's Titanic. But unlike the Titanic, there were almost no bodies recovered, only ashes floating on an ocean of fire. But tragedy at sea doesn't always require collision. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of carelessness by one person. The Star Princess fire. March 23, 2006. The Star Princess was sailing through the Caribbean Sea, carrying nearly 3,800 passengers and crew on a week-long cruise from Fort Lauderdale. It was just after 3 a.m. when a small flicker appeared on a balcony. Someone had flicked a cigarette overboard from an upper deck, but instead of falling into the sea, strong winds carried it onto a lower balcony. The smoldering cigarette landed on plastic furniture and began to burn. For a few minutes, it smoldered undetected. Then it ignited. Strong winds carried the fire from balcony to balcony. The ship's design also meant upper balconies jutted out over lower ones, creating a deadly domino effect. About 297 cabins were engulfed before passengers realized what was happening. Inside, passengers woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of pounding on doors. Some fled wearing only pajamas, crawling through thick black smoke to reach the lifeboat decks. Fire crews fought for over an hour to contain it. When it was finally out, the damage stretched across 3 decks. One man, 72-year-old Richard Liffridge, died from smoke inhalation after trying to escape his cabin. Although initially thought to be a cardiac arrest, autopsy report confirmed his death to be due to the smoke inhalation. 11 others were hospitalized with serious burns and lung injuries. The investigation revealed that the balcony materials were not fire-resistant and that smoke detectors hadn't been installed outdoors. Princess Cruises later retrofitted every ship in its fleet, banning open flames and replacing balcony furnishings with non-combustible materials. A single cigarette had taken a man's life and nearly destroyed a floating city. The Royal Pacific, August 23, 1992. Just after midnight, the cruise ship Royal Pacific was sailing through the Straits of Malacca, about 12 miles off Port Dickson, Malaysia. It was a 2-day cruise to nowhere, dancing, cocktails, music echoing through the decks. 534 passengers and crew had boarded in Singapore for what was supposed to be the perfect weekend escape. The weather was fair with visibility of about 6 to 10 miles, but at 2:15 a.m., while most passengers slept, disaster struck. Out of the darkness, a Taiwanese fishing trawler named Taifu number 51 appeared on a collision course. The trawler was operating without proper navigation lights, and critically, the Royal Pacific's lookout had been sent below deck to call another crew member, leaving the bridge dangerously undermanned. Neither vessel took proper evasive action. The trawler struck the Royal Pacific's port side near the engine room, tearing a massive hole through the hull and creating a split that exposed over 35 meters of the ship's waterline to the sea. Water flooded the engine room and compartments aft within minutes. The emergency generator failed almost immediately, and the ship developed a severe starboard list. Passengers woke to chaos, scrambling through darkening corridors as the vessel tilted beneath them. Many passengers said they received no warning, no instructions, and weren't even shown how to put on life jackets. Because the voyage was under 48 hours, passengers did not receive a full drill, as it was not required by maritime law at the time. They only got a PA briefing and demonstrations on embarkation night. One survivor later recalled, "Everybody panicked and jumped into the dark sea. No crew was there to help us. We threw our daughters in the water first, then jumped in ourselves." The multinational crew struggled to communicate with each other in the confusion. The official investigation later revealed that a critical watertight door had been left open, allowing water to flood freely between compartments. Within 55 minutes of the collision, the Royal Pacific sank stern first in 86 meters of water. Survivors clung to debris in the darkness, some waiting over an hour for rescue boats to arrive. Of the 534 people aboard, 3 were confirmed dead and 6 were never found. 70 more were injured. The investigation concluded that both vessels had failed to maintain proper lookouts and violated international collision regulations, a joint failure that turned a preventable accident into tragedy. It was a disaster almost no one outside Asia ever heard about, but for those on board, it was as sudden and terrifying as any shipwreck in history. The Oceania Insignia Fire. December 11, 2014. The Oceania Insignia was docked at Port Castries, St. Lucia, midway through a 10-day Caribbean cruise. It was supposed to be a routine morning, passengers heading ashore for excursions, crew preparing the decks. At 9:09 a.m., thick black smoke suddenly erupted from the diesel generator room. A fire had broken out near one of the ship's diesel engines, cutting power almost instantly. 4 ship's engineers and 3 service technicians were performing routine maintenance in the space when the fire started. Crew members rushed to evacuate, but the room filled with toxic smoke within seconds. The lights went out. Visibility dropped to 0. 1 crew member, a motorman, and 2 contractors never made it out. All 3 died from smoke inhalation before rescue teams could reach them. 3 members of the ship's fire team were also treated for smoke exposure. The fire was contained to the engine room and extinguished within approximately 30 minutes, but the damage was severe. The ship's electrical systems were destroyed, leaving 656 passengers stranded without power, air conditioning, or ventilation in the Caribbean heat. The master ordered a full evacuation. Passengers were safely moved ashore and flown to Miami on charter flights. The official investigation determined that the fire originated when pressurized fuel oil sprayed from a loose connection and ignited on a hot surface. It was a tragedy hidden from headlines, but for 3 men doing their jobs that morning, it was their final shift. Like, share, and hit subscribe if you want more untold stories like this. 32 lives on the Costa Concordia, 4,386 on the Doña Paz, 852 on the Estonia, 9 on the Royal Pacific, 1 on the Star Princess, 3 on the Oceania Insignia. Not statistics, people, families, birthdays, dreams, gone. Cruise ships are safer now than they've ever been, but the ocean doesn't negotiate, it doesn't forgive, and it doesn't care how much you paid for the upgrade. Thanks for watching.